People in Singapore that I spoke to were quite surprised and troubled that instead of pulling back, there seems to be a push forward and almost, as I said earlier, an emboldened position that France is taking, and Charlie Hebdo in particular. As we are aware, they have on the very next day gone on to publish and distribute a new edition of the publication, cartoon, and this time again depicting the Prophet in not very flattering.
It's not acceptable
way.
to
Not acceptable.
Muslims. Yeah.
Not at all, you know, and it's troubling. Now, what's your take on it? Why are they doing this? It's clearly an emboldened position. What are the consequences of this at a global level?
See, every country draws its own boundaries on what is the extent of freedom of speech. France has its limitations. For example, to deny the Holocaust is a crime in France.
Yeah.
The European Union has laws on what can and cannot be said. Different countries draw them differently, and I think we all agree across the world on one thing. Most sensible people will agree that the attacks were completely unacceptable. Nothing can justify them, and the attackers, the terrorists, were misguided in their belief on what their religion wanted, but no one can justify it or accept it. That much is clear. Now, that doesn't make what Charlie Hebdo did right. A lot of commentators have come forward and said, how can you gratuitously insult religion? France is informed by its own traditions, pre-revolution as well as from the revolution. And now I think France will face up to the reality of a multicultural society and what lines have to be drawn, or may be drawn, or may not be drawn.
Will they face up to the reality? Because if you're in denial of the issue, I mean, basically two wrongs don't make a right. You know,
though there is no moral equivalency between the two.
Sure.
Yeah.
One could argue that it's disproportionate, that the response could be disproportionate. There are many arguments,
Yes.
but at the end of the day,
Yes.
Shouldn't France or shouldn't Charlie Hebdo, for example, take some responsibility for what has happened? I mean, Kian, what's your sense?
I have to say this. In some ways, right, this is a clash of martyrdoms. I have to be very careful about saying this. In the case of some terrorists, they are led to sacrifice their own lives for a cause, and in the process also this involves killing of others. In the case of Charlie Hebdo, it's been documented that Mr. Charbonnet has said something to the effect that I would rather die standing than live on my knees. And
Charbonnet was
yes,
the editor who was killed.
The editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
So this deep conviction, in his case, also for a higher cause. No doubt there is a fundamental difference. None of the cartoonists would think that the pen would be so mighty, mightier than the sword, as in killing people, as opposed to a bullet, which was in fact what happened. Bullets killed the cartoonists. But the thought that keeps coming to my mind that in the clash of martyrdoms, no doubt not morally equivalent, there are no winners, and there are also no third ways. It's one way versus another way, and both are completely absolute.
Yeah, but the point that I'm making is the current position adopted by France and to a lesser extent the rest of Europe, so to speak, is that there's only one guilty party in this. I mean, I think most of us, in fact all of us would agree that what was perpetrated here was wrong. The killing was wrong. But if the other party is not willing to take some part of the responsibility, then I think we've got a problem. I mean, even the Pope today, Pope made a comment. It's very interesting. He was asked this question, right? And he said, he gave the analogy. He said, if you insult my mother,
I will
I'll
punch your
punch
nose.
you in the nose. This is from Pope Francis. So his point is, sometimes the response can appear disproportionate in the conventional term, but if you insult me with something that is very, very much at the core of my being, don't expect me to scold you. I may
Right.
go a few steps beyond that. Now, who is to take responsibility for it? The provocateur or the one who is provoked?
Right. So very, very quickly, I would also like to caution that when we say France and Europe, and more generally the West, I think it bears some observation that France is in some ways more secular or secularized
Yeah, it is secular, yeah.
than many other European contexts, and including the US. Their commitment to secularism has had a long history. Even as recent as September of 2013, there was a secularism charter for the schools
Yes.
and so on, which you don't quite find in other European countries. And so
That's true, but
Yeah.
Kian, at the same time, the reality, while you want to
Yeah.
be secular,
Yeah.
the reality is they've got the largest percentage of Muslims
Exactly.
in Europe, 7 million Muslims.
Exactly.
You can't ignore that fact.
Can I add something? Viswa, you see, your question is focused on Charlie Hebdo and Muslims.
Yes.
Charlie Hebdo is well known for being offensive to the Christians as well.
Yes.
For example, popes with condoms,
Yes.
Catholic nuns masturbating,
Yes.
Bishops sodomizing each other in the Vatican.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think in many places all this would be considered unacceptable. So I suppose in France they have drawn the line where they think that this sort of what we would consider to be deeply offensive material targeted at specific religions is acceptable within their framework of freedom of speech.